So Tim, how did Christian faith become a part of your life?
I was really blessed to be born into a Christian home. My folks are Christians, and back then I came home from the hospital and went to church that very first Sunday. And went every Sunday, but back then we really didn't have much of a kids program or youth program. So all I did for my Christian faith was go to church on Sunday. And so I didn't know a lot. So I leave, finish school, start working in the insurance industry, and I'm at lunch one day with a mate of mine, and he's clearly getting interested about spiritual things. And he asked the question, so what's this Christian thing about? And he's clearly really serious, he clearly wants to know, and I'm going, I have no idea how to answer this question. And so I'm going, this is a very, very important question, I've got to answer it properly. So there's God, it's about God. And I'm scrambling around there's Jesus, it's God and Jesus, you've got to believe in God and Jesus, and the Bible. God, Jesus, and the Bible. I think that's a Trinity. Anyway, I'm just scrambling an answer, and as I'm trying, I've just, in my head, I'm going, you're an idiot. You've been going to church for 18 years of your life, and you don't know what Christianity is about. And anyway, I did my best there, and I said, I'll get back to you. And I go back to work, and I ring the new assistant minister at my church, Chris Edwards, who's now the bishop of the Northern region. So Chris, what do I believe? I don't know what I believe. And he just started at our church at Ingadine Anglican, and there was about a dozen young guys and girls my age, in that late teens, early 20s, who we'd been brought up in that church, but we'd suffered because there was none of the good kids stuff, good youth program, Bible studies. We hadn't done any of that. So he's the one who got us together and started reading the Bible with us, and then doing a bit of training, how to share the gospel, how to defend the gospel. And within a year, we were all completely transformed. I reckon we were probably all Christian, just like this, just enough to be saved. Jesus saves me, yes, I believe that, but no depth. But within that year, it had all changed, and the faith was strong, and we were all inviting friends to church, whereas before we wouldn't talk about it because we didn't know how to answer the question, what do you believe as a Christian?
Dave, when you were 17, you had a conversation with your father, who had just become the Archbishop of the Sydney Diocese. What did you tell him?
I had the opportunity to sit down with Dad after dinner, and summed up all my courage and said, Dad, I've got some news. My girlfriend is pregnant. My family was very religious. My dad had just become Archbishop. I had been chasing girls and doing all these things for years and years, but hiding it and lying about it. It was all deeply secret. And so for me to sit down and tell him my girlfriend is pregnant meant that not only was I saying, hey, I'm going to have a baby as a teenager, as a young man, but also I've been having sex. I've been sleeping around. And so for me, it wasn't just a change of, hey, I'm now going to be a dad, I need to take responsibility for my life, but actually the truth about how I've been living is going to be revealed.
How did your dad respond?
It was both my dad and my mum were there, and my mum put her head in her hands like this. My dad kind of looked wistfully out the window, and my mum stood up and walked back to the pantry and sort of went, oh. And then they both sat down and they looked at each other and they said, are you okay? Is she okay? What can we do? How can we help? What can we pray for? What does she need? And I remember that like it was yesterday, this incredibly powerful reaction, an immediate feeling, but then choosing to respond in a different way, which has stayed with me for a long time.
Why ministry?
Well, I blame Chris Edwards for this. He said, you should think about ministry. And I've gone, well, that's for other people. These ministers would just come to our church, and I didn't know how they got there or the background. That was for other people. But he planted the seed. And then my wife, Anna, and I got married, and he took us to a Moore College open day. And at the end of it, we loved it. We're driving home with him in the car, and he goes, oh, what do you think? And we've gone, I think we should go. I remember sitting in the back seat of his car, I think we're going to go to Moore College.
So fast forward a few years, I'm there, I'm a father with a little girl. I'm married at this stage, got a wife, but I couldn't hold down a job. I'd gone to university and bummed out, I was terrible. I'd ended up being a furniture removalist, but I had the body of a twig. I couldn't lift anything. It was terrible at it. One day I was catching a bus and I saw on the side of the bus an advertisement for the Army, which said the Army, the Edge. And I honestly, Karl, I looked at this and I thought, the Army? How hard could that be? That can't be that hard, surely. So I actually that day got that bus and I went to the recruitment office in the centre of Sydney City. And I went in and spoke to a sergeant and said, I'd like to join. And he said, have you been to university? And I said, yes. I didn't pass, but he goes, good, you should be an officer. And I said, what's an officer? And he said, it's paid more. And I said, great. And like many of our wonderful servicemen and women, I joined the Army because I love my country, but I also joined the Army because I needed a job.
Yeah. Then to put your hand up to be a chaplain. Why be a chaplain in the armed forces?
Well, God, I think, had been working on that for years before it happened. So at school, I was in the Army Cadets, love that. Finish school, and a good mate of my dad's is a sergeant in an Army Reserve Unit, 1 Commando company. And I was fit, doing a lot of triathlons and rugby, and he goes, you should join up, you'd love it. And so I joined up, and it was a lot of fun. But anyway, the seed was there. Started at Moore College, and then the bishop to the Australian Defence Force, there's an Anglican bishop of the Australian Defence Force, who would have thought? He comes to the college, does a bit of a promo thing on the need for good chaplains, and again the seed is sown there. But you've got to have done 3 years in parish life, in a church. So you've got some good pastoral skills.
Yep.
Anyway, providence of God. Finish college and end up at Liverpool Anglican Church. And there's a couple of young engineering captains there that are based out of Holsworthy Barracks. And they're very good evangelists. I start doing some evangelism explained, Christianity explained courses on the base. And they start going, you should think about army chaplains. And anyway, they dob me into the new bishop to the Defence Force, who rings me up, and we start chatting. And I wasn't interested in going to Townsville or Darwin, but he said, there's an opening in Holsworthy with the Airborne Battalion. Do you want it? And I've gone, Chadwana, yep, we'll take that. Because that way we could stay at our church, Liverpool Anglican, and marry up the ministry at Holsworthy a whole lot better.
Yeah. So how did the Army change you, Dave?
I joined the Army as a undisciplined, lazy, unfocused bum, I guess.
You were a fabulous recruit, clearly.
Perfect recruit. And I remember stepping out the bus. You know, you're on the bus with a bunch of the other recruits and you step out and you're met by a wall of sergeants with their slouch hats on. And we think slouch hats are this admirable thing in Australia. They are, but they're also a very intimidating thing, which they create this persona. And you meet these men, these platoon sergeants, and suddenly you realise this isn't a joke anymore, this is real. Yeah. And you're not in Kansas anymore, this is gonna turn ugly quickly, because they start screaming at you immediately as you get off the bus. I think for the first 6 to 8 weeks was the time in the Army where they shave your head and you're learning to march and learning to... And you think, oh, they're just getting you to do things, but that's not what they're doing. They're rebuilding you as a person who will take orders, a person who will listen, a person who will obey and act. And they're very good at it. And so by the time I came back from my initial boot camp, which is 12 weeks long, I was a completely different person. I thought differently. I suddenly had discipline and drive. I thought critically about myself, but actually also about others. And that ethos of the Army, I actually think is a wonderful thing and certainly stayed with me in my time. But in addition to that, there's a part of the Army which is ugly. And that's generally concerning the fact that for young men in particular, it's a very macho environment, chest beating. You're always trying to big note each other and intimidate one another. And it's also an environment which has a lot of drinking, womanising and violence. Not approved by the Army hierarchy, but it certainly just exists within there. Like a footy team all the time, that's your job. Yeah. And so I went from a young guy from a Christian family who couldn't get up before 11 to suddenly being a guy a year later who would be getting in fights in the pub every single week, who began to chase women a lot, even though I had a wife and children at home, and a guy who became very, very critical of everyone else around me, who began to think of myself as higher than anyone else because I was in the army.
Yeah. When you were at Holsworthy, were the soldiers open to Christian things?
Yeah, they were. The pressure cooker environment that exists in these battalions is incredible, and you can't not think about the big things in life. So when you join 3RAR, you do your para course down at Nowra. That's full on, and when I was there, I was the most popular person down there because people want to pray. It's terrifying. I've never prayed more than I did on that para course. Dear God, and it's a simple prayer, dear God, make sure I don't die today, look after me. But people instinctively, dear God, help. As you're going out that door, everyone's a believer. And dear God, help me here. Like particularly your first step, you do 7 jumps to qualify as a paratrooper, and you're praying hard, and you feel it down there. And the other thing is, of course, you're the padre, you're the God guy, and I've been talking about God and stuff. They know I'm not shy, and I'm not an idiot. I say I've got some good answers to some of their questions, so they're getting interested in it. When there's the God guy down there, it's like they've got permission to talk about it. If there's no God guy there, everyone's got to be tough and not talk about it. But it's there in their heads, you can see it. And so, but when the padre's there and he's connecting with them, and they're starting to ask questions, and the answers, they like the sound of the answers and stuff. Just stuff comes. And then you come back to the battalion, and picture this, you're 18, 19 years of age, and then you say, the legal officer brings you in and says, listen, we're going to do your will now. Time to write your will. Where do you want all your stuff to go when you die? You're sort of going, well, what do you mean I need a will? You could die here, mate. And so you're jumping out of planes, that's terrifying. You're writing your will, and you're a trained killer, and then the operational tempo is very high back then when we were there, Afghanistan, Iraq, East Timor, Solomons. A lot of people are being killed, you're avoiding being killed, some of our guys are being killed. That's a pressure cooker environment, and you're just a lot of guys. I had, every day I'm having really deep, serious conversations about the eternal things.
In all this time, you got to know Dave Jensen. When you first met Dave Jensen, what was he like?
Well, actually, when I first met Dave, he was in year 11 at school, and I was at Moore College, and we did some training. I was going for a run one night, and he was, and we just started training together from there. So we stayed in touch as I left Moore College, he left school and did his life, and then he joined the Army a little bit before I joined up. So he was down at Duntroon studying down there. And then when he graduated, he went to 2RAR and I'm at 3RAR. So every now and then we bump into each other at exercises.
Tim Booker was the most popular chaplain in the Australian Army, not because he softened his message, but because of his convictions. There's a lot of chaplains who would do things to impress people. They'd have a drink with the boys, or they'd have a smoke, or they'd swear a little bit, or they'd do these things. Not having a go at these guys, but I understand what they were doing. Tim would never do that. Tim was his own man. He was a man of deep conviction, gospel conviction about God, but also a man who judged no one, who showed grace and love to people in his talk with them, was a straight shooter, but did it in a way which was unique, which set him apart. In addition to that, he didn't do things to impress the boys, but it also helped that he happened to be fitter than most of the boys, stronger. He did parachuting with them, he ran with them, he did these things, but not to impress them, but because he loved to do them. He considered himself a soldier.
So I got deployed to the Solomon Islands. In 2005, we had a soldier die over there. In 2006, I went back to the Solomons at the very beginning for a Thanksgiving service, and then a lot of stuff happened. So we had a soldier die in Iraq. So I went over there to Iraq. I was meant to stay there longer, but then East Timor erupted. So I had to come back because our unit had moved to Townsville and then Darwin, was ready to go in. So I get a call when I'm in Baghdad from the CO, Padre, Timor's erupted. We've got a warning order. By the time you get back, we'll be in Townsville, and give me a call when you're back in the country and we'll get you up. I'll keep you updated on where we are. So I had to fly back. So I leave. I hadn't been home for weeks already because of the Solomons, because of Iraq, because of this young soldier who died. And then I get home, and ring the CEO, and he goes, listen, stay at home for a day because I'm not sure when you're coming back. So we didn't know. When we left, I said to Anna, we might not go into Timor, we might go into Timor, might be a couple of months, might be 6 months. Anyway, I left and it was 6 months we were away for.
The marriage was going badly. It was falling apart. And we decided to do something which I wouldn't recommend to anyone, which is to say, hey, let's have another baby. This might fix things. But unfortunately and tragically, by the time my son was born, the marriage had dissolved. And a week after my son was born, my battalion was deployed to East Timor for, I think it was 8 months with 2 days notice. It was a quick reaction force. And I remember sitting there holding my child and speaking to my wife and agreeing with one another, this is it, it's over. And what it would look like when I got back, we didn't know, but it wouldn't be marriage, it would be done. And so when I got on the plane to East Timor, it was realising that's the end of my marriage. That's the end of this chapter.
Most of 2RAR were overseas, but there was a fair number left. They jumped in with our battle group, and Dave was there. So then I caught up with Dave and saw just how bad the situation was.
What was he like?
He was out of control.
Right.
So the marriage was imploding, was officially about to end, and it had knocked him around, and he was living a very bad life, and you could see it. There was this nastiness in his eyes, there was this out of controlness in his eyes. He was really upset by the marriage imploding, of course, and he was in a bad place. Yeah.
I got the news, I think a month or two into the deployment, that my wife was leaving back to Ireland with the children and taking the kids. Karl, I'm ashamed to say that I didn't care. I thought, okay, well, that's life, moving on. And I'd become so callous and so hardened of heart that actually there was a part of me that was relieved and thought, oh, well, the pain of our difficult marriage is over. And actually there was a part of me that was excited. The thought of, I can go home now in 6 months' time and I can do what I want, whenever I want, however I want, with whoever I want, and not have to lie anymore. I can just be me. Yeah.
What did you think his future was then?
Well, I was a bit worried about that. I wasn't sure what his future was, but I started praying that, okay, this is where he's going to bottom out, and God, I pray this will be where God brings him back here. Yeah.
When I got back from East Timor, I remember arriving to an empty house, which had once been full of laughter and children running around, and I got back and there was no one at the airport to meet me. I got back and I got to this house and it was empty after 9 months. And I remember dropping my bags and thinking, right, that's it. I was devastated, a huge part of me, but I couldn't address it, I couldn't deal with it, I didn't know what to do with it. So I went out and I went and got drunk. And that was the nature of my life for the next 6 years. I went to work, I'd save my money to go out, to get drunk, to chase girls, to fight. I love playing rugby, so I worked very hard on that. I started to go to the gym, I wanted to be big, I wanted to be strong. And I had the freedom to do just that. And so the next 6 years were really a story of me pursuing that satisfaction and that success in every avenue available to me. But by the time I'm 28, as I'm now in a new place, I'm living in Darwin at this stage, and I just press repeat on the same thing and start doing the same thing over and over again. I'm starting to become aware that I've achieved all the things I ever wanted, and there's still a part of me that's deeply unhappy, a part of me that's deeply unsatisfied. And I didn't have a moment earlier on the year or anything like this, but a dawning realisation, I suppose, over the course of 6 to 9 months that if life is about achieving every goal I've ever set out to reach, and I've achieved every goal and I'm still unsatisfied, then there must be something more. There must be something more to life than what I'm doing.
So how did you then explore another option?
My sister had given me a laptop computer for my birthday. And I thought, her old laptop computer, and I thought, wonderful, pornography. I can finally have my own computer. And for the first few months of having it, that's exactly what it was. But one day in October 2009, I woke up hungover and I went to YouTube. And my sister, my twin sister, had always kept talking to me about Christian things. And she'd preloaded a bunch of sermons into YouTube, which I didn't know how to delete. I was so bad at technology. And these weren't big, profound sermons, just simple sermons about Jesus, about what he'd done. And so one morning I woke up and I just found myself on YouTube and I clicked on one of these sermons. And there I heard someone speak about Jesus' death and say that Jesus died for bad people, not for good people. And Karl, I've got to say, I probably had heard that 85 million times my entire life. But even though I'd heard it, I'd never listened. And for whatever reason that day, like for the very first time, it struck me that I wasn't a good person. I was in deep, deep trouble. And I was in deep, deep trouble primarily not because I'd hurt people, although I had, and not because I'd lied, although I did that endlessly, and not because I'd cheated, although I did that endlessly. But I was a bad person because I'd spent my whole life ignoring God. And I became very, very afraid, realizing that, my goodness, if there is a God and he is there, I've spent my whole life ignoring him.
Yeah.
Thankfully, because of my background, I knew some Christians. And so Tim Booker made an impact on me as a non-Christian, in the sense that I saw him there and I thought, there was a part of me that thought, if I'm ever going to be a Christian, I want to be like that. Wow. That's the guy I want to be like. And so when I had this crisis, I thought, my goodness, he's the only guy I can call. He's not going to judge me. He's not going to put me down. He's going to understand where I'm coming from, but he's going to give it to me straight.
Yeah. When he called you, were you surprised?
Yes and no. I've seen people become Christians from all sorts of backgrounds and troubles and so on. And so I was surprised, because it's beautiful when it happens, but it's always a shock when you see this turnaround and the spiritual lights are on and he's keen to come back to God. So I was surprised, but excited, really excited about God. God's clearly now working in him, bringing him back. Yeah.
And I said, Tim, I need to speak to you. I'm terrified. I've been ignoring God my whole life. And I confessed to him everything. Not that I had to, I just wanted to. I said, here's been the reality of my last years. And he laughed and he said, Dave, I know. We all know. Everyone knows who you are. I said, Tim, what do I do? And he said, what do you want to do? And I said, I want to know God. I want to know why I'm alive. I want to be forgiven, but what do I have to do?
He'd finally realised that he was not living for God. I think when you're born and bred in a good, strong Christian home, you know it all, and you think, "Cause you know it all, you're Christian," sort of thing. I think that's where his thinking was for many years, but he clearly was not converted, and the fruit of that was in his life. There was no Christianness in his life at all. And but this was all starting to change in the conversation. God was clearly working in him, and he was still clearly starting to realise you're not just a Christian because you're born into your parents are strong Christians and you've been to church all your life.
And what Tim said to me over the next minute has changed my eternity, Karl. He said, Dave, your sin has not disqualified you from God's kingdom. It's qualified you for his grace. Jesus died for you not because you're perfect, but because you're not perfect. But you cannot know God until you understand that Jesus has died for you, he's risen from the dead, and you need to ask for forgiveness and understand that Jesus is your only hope, not you. You need to take that crown off your own head and put it on the head of Jesus.
There has to be that personal decision, not only to repent of your sins and believe Jesus, but put Jesus in charge of your life. Now, when you're a proud, big Australian Army officer, That's the big thing, is humbling yourself to put Jesus in charge. So that was, I could see that was the battle. He knew Jesus had saved him, but the life change was that was an arm wrestle for some time after that conversation. But clearly, God was working, and I know that God when He starts His work, He doesn't stop it, and He wins. So I knew it was just a matter of time.
And he said, Dave, you need to get real with God today. You need to pray to Him. And I said, Tim, I've prayed 100 times before, mate, 1,000,000 times. And I had, when my wife had left, whenever I was scared, when someone shot at me, I prayed. And I said, how do I know that God's listening? And he said, pray until you know. Pray until you know He's heard you. And so I put the phone down and I leant on the side of my bed, and I hadn't cried for a decade. And I cried out to God to forgive me.
Wow. Did you feel it?
I felt intense grief. I felt intense shame and regret as I considered everything that I'd done and the way that I'd treated God. And I felt intense despair as I cried out to God, realising how pathetic I was. And I actually fell asleep in my tears. And Karl, I stand here before you today just to say that the next morning there wasn't a shining light or an angel in my room. But as I awoke the next morning, I knew God had forgiven me.
Yeah.
I felt Him. I felt loved. I felt that God had seen everything and forgiven me. I later understood what happened, but at the time I couldn't articulate it. But what I felt was that I had a Father in heaven, that He loved me. And the same love my Father had shown me in life, God was showing me, but more, that I was saved. And as I stood up that next morning, covered in my own tears and still my clothes, I went to the mirror and I said, I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian. And I got it.
In a call like that, do you feel like, oh gosh, should I be a counsellor or do I be direct?
Yeah.
What was your response?
Yeah, so it depends, doesn't it, on what's going on. But I'd known Dave for so long, and he just, at that point, needed a bit of directness. And I called him out on some lying. He was just a serial liar, and I called him out on it. And it sort of knocked him around. And I'm glad it knocked him around a bit. It sort of knocked a bit of sense into him. And because it's not just me that can see that, mate. It's other people as well, you know. And it's an ugly part of life. But you do that when you're covering stuff up and when you're not being truthful and honest, you know. Whereas Jesus, He's the way, the truth and the life, you know. We live a different life now. We live for Him. If we do the wrong thing, we fess it up. And of course, you know, when you come to Jesus, you become a forgiven sinner, not perfect. So I just confronted him with that thing in particular because it kept coming out in the conversation. And anyway, he's... In conversations post that, he's mentioned that was a thing that just sort of jolted him to confess that sin and sin generally.
And what began for me next, Karl, was a journey particularly over the next 2 years of disentangling myself from my sinful, my behaviour which just rejected God again and again. For me it was pretty extreme because my life looked like violence and promiscuity and alcohol. But what I began to realise over time was two things happened. One, for the first time ever, I began to hate the things that I did. When I'd get drunk or when I'd chase a girl or previously I'd been proud of those things, but something had switched inside of me. Now I looked at them and I just thought, what have I done? And over time, God used that to make me go, I don't want to do that anymore. He changed my desires. The second thing that happened to me primarily though was I realised after around a year that if I was to stop being in these situations where I'd be drawn into my old way of living, I needed to replace them with something good, something wholesome and healthy spiritually. And so I joined a church. And I realised as I joined that church, smoking out the front before my first time, and I got tats everywhere and feeling, oh, they're going to hate me, they're going to judge me. The reception I received in this church was not that, it was that. And I realised that church wasn't a collection of perfect people showing off to each other, but actually a collection of sinful, broken people like me, loving one another, gathered around God. And so now I work as a pastor at a church, and primarily I work in the field of telling non-Christian people about Jesus. Having coffee, sitting down, having a beer, having a chat, and just like one beggar showing another beggar where to get bread, saying, hey, Jesus is the bread of life, and let me tell you about it. And it's a wonderful job. Yeah.
So what was the response to the family as you got a job within a church?
Mate, I remember telling my parents when I became a Christian, and my dad wept with joy. My mother looked at me and said, are you sure? Is this real? Is this... And my parents have been my biggest supporters. The biggest ones of saying, Dave, you know, if this is something that God has gifted you to do, I would love for you to do it, and take it seriously and do it, because it's the most important job that you could do. God has blessed me with a beautiful wife now, Sam, and we've got 4 more little boys in addition to my 2 wonderful children. And so I've been very, very blessed with my family saying, hold on, the most important thing we can do with our time is tell Aussies and others the great news of Jesus and do it together. So, yeah.
As you see Dave now and what he's doing, what do you think?
Oh, it's just a beautiful, miraculous transformation. Yeah, God's done an incredible work.